Read my lips.
I will promise you this, that if we have not gotten our troops out by the time I am president, it is the first thing I will do. I will get our troops home. We will bring an end to this war. You can take that to the bank.
You know, we had comments out from former Fed Chief Alan Greenspan overnight saying that, look, more bank failures, it's going to happen. And this time, the Feds are letting Lehman go to the wall. And if Greenspan is right, there are more to come. This is worrying.
Well, we believe that there may be 1,000 U.S. banks fail before we get through with this crisis. So
1,000?
Yeah.
It is the first thing I will do. I will get our troops home. We will bring an end to this war.
It turns out the United States has quietly increased the number of support troops in Afghanistan. The Washington Post reports that the U.S. is deploying at least 13,000 more troops in supporting roles. These forces were not mentioned by the president last March when he announced an additional 21,000 combat troops. 68,000 Americans will be in Afghanistan by the year's end, and that is double the number when President Bush left office.
Read my lips.
And I can make a firm pledge. Under my plan, no family making less than $250,000 a year will see any form of tax increase. Not your income tax, not your payroll tax, not your capital gains taxes, not any of your taxes.
Under this mandate, the government is forcing people to spend money, fining you if you don't. How is that not a tax? That may be, but it's still a tax increase.
That's not true, George. For us to say that you've got to take a responsibility to get health insurance is absolutely not a tax increase.
But it may be fair, it may be good public policy.
No, but George, you can't just make up that language and decide that that's called a tax increase. Then
I don't think I'm making it up. Merriam-Webster's dictionary. Tax, a charge usually of money imposed by authority on persons or property for public purposes.
George, the fact that you looked up Merriam's dictionary, the definition of tax increase, indicates to me that you're stretching a little bit right now.
But language in the Baucus Senate proposals clearly says those without health insurance will be subject to an additional, quote, tax. What's going on?
President Obama on the campaign trail promised no new middle-class taxes.
If you make less than $250,000 a year, you will not see one single dime of tax increases.
Page 29 of the bill, an excise tax on those who do not have health insurance. It ranges from $750 to $3,800.
Yeah, you know, if you pull out a dictionary, it's pretty clear that if the government is imposing a fee on its citizens, that pretty much meets the definition of a tax. But I think there is a little bit of a word game here.
Yeah, I love the president saying to George Stephanopoulos, you have to have liability insurance. Nobody considers that a tax, but one would consider it a tax if there were a fine of $3,800 for not so doing. I'm playing a few word games with Mr. Stephanopoulos.
Here's what President Obama said Monday on whether President Bush, the officials of the Bush administration, should be investigated for possible crimes.
Generally speaking, I'm more interested in looking forward than I am in looking backwards.
Like I've said earlier, I'm not going to go into the past and talk about my past. I'm not here to talk about the past.
Well, that but's a big word, but in a new poll, nearly two-thirds of the American people said there should be some sort of investigation into whether the Bush administration did commit war crimes. Nearly 40% say it should be a criminal investigation, which means, of course, people could go to prison.
Today we journey from Operation Cast Lead to Operation Cast Doubt. Almost as serious as committing war crimes is covering up war crimes, pretending that war crimes were never committed and did not exist. Because behind every such deception is the nullification of humanity, the destruction of human dignity, the annihilation of the human spirit, the triumph of Orwellian thinking, the eternal prison of the dark heart of the totalitarian. How can we ever expect there to be peace in the Middle East if we tacitly approve of violations of international law and international human rights, if we look the other way, or if we close our eyes to the heartbreak of people on both sides by whitewashing a legitimate investigation? And it is our responsibility, our duty, to see that no individual, no group, no people are barred from this humble human claim.
Our legitimacy is reduced when we've got a Guantanamo that is open, when we suspend habeas corpus, those kinds of things erode our moral claims that we are acting on behalf of broader universal principles, and that's one of the reasons why those kinds of issues are so important. We're going to lead by shutting down Guantanamo and restoring habeas corpus in this country so that we offer them an example. I think that folks made a terrific point that we have to stand for human rights, and that should be part of the trade equation. It is harder for us to do it when we have situations like Guantanamo, where we've suspended habeas corpus. To the extent that we are not being true to our values and our ideals, that sends a negative message to the world, and it gives us less leverage then when we want to deal with countries that are abusing human rights. So I think it's part and parcel with a larger program of us restoring the traditions that made this country great and made us admired around the world.
There are a number of different things that you could do early pertaining to executive orders.
Right.
One of them is to shut down Guantanamo Bay. Mm-hmm. Another is to change interrogation methods that are used by U.S. troops. Are those things that you plan to take early action on?
Yes. I have said repeatedly that I intend to close Guantanamo, and I will follow through on that. I've said repeatedly that America doesn't torture, and I'm going to make sure that we don't torture. Those are part and parcel of an effort to regain America's moral stature in the world.
Guantanamo had become a focus of international condemnation during the Bush era, and the order to shut it down within 1 year was greeted with acclaim abroad. But now Obama has admitted publicly for the first time that the January 2010 deadline for closure will not be met.
Read my lips.
I don't switch positions or make promises that can't be kept.
He told an American TV interviewer that in Washington, things moved slower than he anticipated.
When you really hear him, you witness a very rare thing. You witness a politician who has an ear for eloquence and a tongue dipped in the unvarnished truth.
Iran, Cuba, Venezuela, these countries are tiny compared to the Soviet Union. They don't pose a serious threat to us. Iran, they spend 1/100th of what we spend on the military. Iran is a grave threat. It has an illicit nuclear program. It supports terrorism across the regions and militias in Iraq.
Read my lips.
I don't switch positions or make promises that can't be kept. I have said throughout this campaign that this war was ill-conceived, that it was a strategic blunder, and that it needs to come to an end. I have also said that I would be deliberate and careful in how we got out, that I would bring our troops home at a pace of 1 to 2 brigades per month, and that pace we would have our combat troops out in 16 months. That position has not changed. I have not equivocated on that position. I am not searching for maneuvering room with respect to that position.
Remember, the Status of Forces Agreement just signed by Bush and the Iraqi government says that U.S. troops will be gone from Iraq entirely in 3 years. Nevertheless, Bob Gates said he thought there would be a residual force of U.S. troops in Iraq more than 3 years from now that numbered in the several tens of thousands. Several tens of thousands of U.S. troops indefinitely staying in Iraq, even beyond the country-to-country agreement we just signed with Iraq that says we'll leave? Boy, you know, if you are one of the 70% of Americans who wants U.S. troops out of Iraq on that 16-month timetable that Obama promised, I bet you are glad about this election we just had, huh? Getting rid of that old administration that sees several tens of thousands of American troops indefinitely in Iraq for years. Wow, good thing we are saying goodbye to George W. Bush's Defense Secretary, Bob Gates. And now we're saying hello to Barack Obama's Defense Secretary, Bob Gates. The U.S. may try to get around the just signed requirement that U.S. combat troops be out of Iraqi cities by June of next year by massaging the meaning of the word combat. You ready? Quote, military planners are now quietly acknowledging that many troops will stay behind as renamed trainers and advisors in what are effectively combat roles. In other words, they will still be engaged in combat, just called something else. So, Iraq withdrawal? Not really a withdrawal.
Yeah, I'm not so sure the role of the United States is to go around the world and say this is the way it's got to be. If we're an arrogant nation, they'll resent us. I think one way for us to end up being viewed as the ugly American is for us to go around the world saying, we do it this way, so should you. Let me say this to you. I wouldn't use force.
I believe public service is honorable. And every time I hear that someone has breached the public trust, it breaks my heart. And I wonder sometimes if we've forgotten who we are. Prosperity with a purpose means taking your idealism and making it concrete by certain acts of goodness. It means helping a child from an unhappy home learn how to read. But where is it written that we must act if we do not care, as if we're not moved? Well, I am moved. I want a kinder and gentler nation.